Well, good day everybody. Welcome back to the High Desert Garden. Today I'm going to be showing you how I make my homemade tomato soup using organic homegrown tomatoes right out of my own garden here. Part of gardening is being sure to preserve your harvest if you're growing large quantities of stuff so that things don't go to waste. Throughout the season we do eat a lot of tomatoes on sandwiches, hamburgers, or just eating them raw. My 3-year-old loves to eat raw tomatoes. So I'm going to try to make this as quick as I can, but I'm going to try to get the details across because the details are important in this recipe. Stick around because it is so good. I also just want to let you guys know that I don't have a Patreon. I don't ask for your guys' money. The only thing I ask for is please slap a like on it. You guys are definitely going to enjoy this video. I'm also going to be canning a lot of this tomato soup when I do make it. So I like to use plenty of tomatoes when I make a batch of tomato soup. You guys can use as many tomatoes as you want. Now, it is also very important not to just use one variety or even 2 varieties of tomatoes. What I find is you get the fullest flavor and textures and everything when you use many different varieties, no matter what you're making. For example, if you're making corn tortillas, don't just use one type of corn. When you're making tomato soup, I've got in here Roma tomatoes, even cherry tomatoes. Don't count out the cherry tomatoes just because they're small. They pack a lot of flavor and they add that extra sweetness. So the tomatoes that I'm using today is I have beefsteak, I have pink ox heart. Now, this is fall, so these tomatoes are not as vibrant and flavorful as they usually will be. But this tomato soup is going to be just as good because of the way that it's made. But whatever varieties of tomatoes you guys grow, don't be afraid to use as many different varieties as you can. So step 1 is going to be making sure that you remove all of the green stems from your tomatoes. You obviously don't want that in your soup. Next, we are going to preheat the oven to 400 degrees. So I have the oven already preheated to 400 degrees. Put your tomatoes in a roasting pan. Make sure you have oven-safe roasting pans. And then we're going to go ahead and put these in the oven at 400 degrees for at least 30 minutes. This process is very important. The reason why the roasting process is so important is because if you were to put these tomatoes through your mill or whatever you use to extract the meat from them, if the tomatoes are not roasted, all you're going to end up with is tomato water, not tomato soup. So roasting them for the process that I'm going to show you here is very important. Also, roasting them gets you that nice roasted smoky flavor, and it concentrates the juices and the sugars and the flavors of the tomatoes. So at least 30 minutes in the oven right now. Okay, so after roasting your tomatoes, you need to process them through some type of milling process. So you could use a hand mill like this. And you just crank this little thing here, and that mills the tomatoes. And you want to try to make sure that you use a mesh with holes that are fine enough so that it'll catch the, things like the tomato seeds and the skins of the tomatoes. Unless you want those in your soup. You can have those in your soup if you want. In that case, you might just use a food processor or something to kind of chew up the skin and stuff to make it easier for eating. So these food mills typically come with many different size mesh holes. Now, if you're doing a lot of tomatoes, this is a very long process in my experience. So what I like to use is something that I actually think works better and is also faster. I have over here, and I'm going to go ahead and bring you guys in close. I have over here a centrifugal juicer. Now this one is a Jack Lane juicer, but you could use any type of centrifugal juicer that has a very fine wire mesh like this. So when your tomatoes are nice and roasted and the meat is really soft and juicy, this spins really fast and the meat of the tomato actually will go through these little holes. You will lose a little bit of it in the process, but not much, and you can also run it back through the juicer a second time if you'd like. So this just goes on here like so, and we'll clamp it down, and then we'll run our tomatoes through the juicer. And on this end, you can catch it with a bowl or a little pan. Alternatively, if you don't want to filter out the seeds and the skins because they do contain a lot of minerals and vitamins, if you have a Vitamix juicer, which I don't have, but you don't want the seeds and the skins, you know, sort of, you don't want that texture in your soup, you could take a Vitamix juicer, and the Vitamix just liquefies everything, the seeds, the skin, and everything, and then you're not wasting anything, and you'll get a lot more soup that's going to be a lot healthier for you. The downside to that is if you have any tomatoes that have a little bit of blossom end rot and so forth on the skins, is you might have to go through and cut that off if you don't want that as part of your soup. Now, it's also going to be important for me to explain that you want to make sure you use a centrifugal juicer for this process. You don't want to use a masticating juicer. For example, this is a masticating juicer, anything with an auger, because that is not going to filter out all the skins and the seeds. Unless you want that in your soup. You might find that this works good, but in my opinion, for what I like, I really don't think this is going to be the juicer. Not only that, is this has a, you know, oftentimes these masticating juicers have a tiny hole, and that is going to be very inconvenient for putting your tomatoes through, because if you have large tomatoes, you're going to have to cut them all up. Okay, for the next part of the process, we've got everything set up. When your tomatoes are roasted and come out of the oven, they should look something like this. They're going to be very hot and very soft, and the skins should be very wrinkly. These actually may have been able to go a little bit longer in the oven, so you could go longer, even 40 minutes or so. You're also going to have a lot of juice in the bottom of the pan. Make sure that juice ends up in your soup. I like to juice mine straight out into a pot because next it's going to go on the stove. Okay, the next part of this is to get your soup boiling on the stove because you want to condense those juices even more. There's still a bunch of water in here, and we are going to evaporate a little bit, not a lot, just a little bit. I've only actually juiced about half the tomatoes, so I've only processed half the tomatoes so far. I still have all of these to process, and look at all that yummy juice and oils in there. And I still have those tomatoes to do yet. So I'm going to go ahead and show you now how I season the soup. Okay, so right now I have 2 pans of tomato soup. This one I've just put on the stove. This one's been on for a while. And you heard me say early, boil it. You do want it to come to a good boil just for a little bit. Not that you want to boil the heck out of it. And then just let it simmer like this for a little bit. And you're going to see a chemical change. You're going to see some foam, and then if you stir it, what you're eventually going to see is that it's going to turn to a deep, very deep, dark red color. Okay, the very first thing I'm going to add here is the most important thing. And I know you're going to think this is weird, but tomatoes are very acidic, and a little bit of acidity is good to add to the flavor and push that flavor forward. But I think this is a secret to making tomato soup, is you can just bring that acidity down a little bit and you get a better flavor. So I don't really do measuring. I just add, this is maybe half a teaspoon to this pan. And what you're going to see is obviously when you add baking soda, which is a very basic substance, to an acidic substance, you're going to get more foaming. And that foaming will die back down in a little bit. So I also like to add some black pepper. You can use ground black pepper, whatever type of pepper you like to use. I just like to get a good amount of black pepper in there. And you can use diced onions if you have them, or I like to just add maybe half a teaspoon of some onion powder. Of course, salt. It's going to add some great flavor and also act as a preservative. So I do maybe a teaspoon to a teaspoon and a half of salt in a pan this size. I also like to add some basil. Be careful, you may not want to overpower your soup with too much basil. I don't use a lot. I like the flavor of the tomatoes, and I don't want to overpower those too much. Also use some oregano here, and this is oregano that I grew in my garden, so I really have to shake it to get it out. I didn't really crumble it up that much. So a little oregano and basil, and then of course one of the most important things is some diced garlic, which is not diced yet, so I'm going to go dice that. I like to add 1 clove of garlic. Being careful not to overpower it with garlic. You can add as little or as much of these seasonings, and you can add your own seasonings if you have seasonings that you like to use. This is just what I find works the best for me. Now the great thing is, once this soup is done, it makes great tomato soup. But if you want to use it in things like spaghettis, it is excellent in spaghetti, especially if you just add a little tomato paste, or you can even simmer this for a couple of hours, condense it down even more, and then it works excellent for spaghetti as is. Okay, so the soup has been simmering for approximately 30 minutes, and that's usually all you need. I mean, you can simmer it as little or as much as you like. This one back here has actually been simmering for about half the time. You can see it's not quite the deep dark red color. The foam still has a little bit of whiteness to it. As of 5 minutes ago, this foam was actually still very white. And this one over here, you should be able to clearly see even the foam is a bright dark red color. And the soup is, this is going to taste like extra happiness, and this is going to taste like happiness. But if we simmer this for another 15 minutes, it's going to be extra happy as well. Now, canning is going to be a separate video. I'm actually not comfortable doing a canning video at this point. The canning process you don't want to get wrong. You want to make sure that you can this safely, do it properly. So go watch a good canning video, watch a couple of them to make sure that you get all the information you need about canning, because you don't want to make a mistake and end up with something like botulism. So I'm going to can these off camera. I want to thank you guys so much for watching and supporting the channel, and for slapping a like on the video. As always, I want to encourage you guys to grow organic, eat organic, so you can be organic.